careful balance that Congress put into the Clean Water Act more than 40 years ago. So we thank you for joining us on this event today. I'd like to take a moment to recognize the career teams at EPA, the Department of Army, our Office of General Counsel, Office of Management and Budget, Army Corps of Engineers. Several of you are here in the room. I saw Donna and John and Mindy, and if you folks can raise your hands. Thank you for your hard work, your dedication. Your professionalism throughout this long journey has been greatly appreciated. Ryan and I and our senior leadership really appreciate your hard work. This is another stop in an important journey, and there's still work to do, but we could not do this without you, and so we really appreciate it. Thank you for your work. So, let's do it again. So with that, I'd like to invite our honored guests to the stage. Acting Administrator Andrew Wheeler for EPA, the Assistant Secretary for Civil Works for the Department of Army, Mr. R.D. James, and we have a special guest joining them today on stage, the Secretary of the Interior, Ryan Zinke. So gentlemen, please join us. We are also honored to have several members, distinguished members of Congress who have taken time out of their busy day. There's some important work happening today up on the Hill, but they've decided to come join us to share in this event. So if the members of Congress would please join us on the stage for the signing ceremony, we'd appreciate it. Members? Hey, Troy Lyons, that's your cue. By the gathering, you can understand the importance of this event. So Administrator Wheeler, Mr. James, if you would like to sign the proposed rule, we'd appreciate that. All right, so this is where the fun begins. We're gonna manage the team, have the congressional membership take some seats, and I'm gonna ask the administrator to join us at the podium and offer some opening remarks. So thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Right there.
Thank you, Dave, for the introduction. And I want to thank you and the entire Office of Water for the work you've put in today's announcement, as well as our partners at the Army Corps of Engineers. Could I ask the people from the Office of Water and the Army Corps in the audience to please stand? I'm sure there's some of you in the back. Before I begin, I want to recognize Secretary Zinke, Assistant Secretary James, Deputy Secretary Sinsky, and members of Congress, the Senate, White House staff, industry leaders, and our distinguished guests. We're also joined today by Zippy Duvall, President of the American Farm Bureau Federation, and the presidents of all 50 state farm bureaus here in the audience. Thank you for being here today. This impressive group and the people they represent reflect just how significant this rulemaking is to the American public. When President Trump took office, he immediately began a process to remove and replace undue regulatory burdens that stifle American innovation and economic development. At the top of the list was the Obama administration's 2015 Waters of the United States definition. Today, EPA and the Army Corps are proposing a new definition of waters of the United States that puts an end to the previous administration's power grab. The three overarching principles that I wanted to ensure are in this proposal are: one, that property owners should be able to stand on their property and be able to tell whether or not they have water that is a federal water without having to hire outside professionals. Number two, that we are clearly defining the difference between a federally protected waterway and state protected waterways. And three, that we are providing the certainty the American public needs and in a manner that will be upheld by the courts. That is why we are closely following the language of the Clean Water Act and the three Supreme Court decisions. When the Obama EPA put forward their 2015 definition, they claimed it was in the best interest of water quality. But it was really about power in the hands of the federal government over farmers, developers, and landowners. The Missouri Farm Bureau, for example, estimated that over 95% of the state's land area could have come under the 2015 Obama definition, despite the fact that Missouri and most states already have their own protections for waters within their borders, regardless of whether they are federally regulated. Under the 2015 rule, more landowners across the U.S. will need to apply for a federal permit to exercise control over their own property, a costly and time-consuming process that runs counter to our Republican form of government. Not only can the process to obtain a federal permit cost tens of thousands of dollars, but the 2015 definition also put local land use decisions in the hands of Washington, D.C. Congress did not intend the federal government to be the nation's development planner. Government has a responsibility to protect the people, but not run their lives. In line with President Trump's February 2017 executive order, our proposal would replace the 2015 definition with one that respects the rule of law and the primary role of the states in managing their land and water resources. It would end years of uncertainty over where federal jurisdiction begins and ends. For the first time, we are clearly defining the difference between federally protected wetlands and state-protected wetlands. And inspired by Justice Scalia's Rapanos opinion, our proposal adheres to the statutory limits of our authority. Finally, it would ensure that America's water protections, among the best in the world, will remain strong while giving states and tribes the certainty to manage their waters in a way that best protect their natural resources and local economies. The proposal identifies 6 categories of waters that are waters of the U.S. 1, traditional navigable waters, following the clear language of the Clean Water Act. 2, tributaries to those navigable waters. 3, certain ditches, such as those used for navigation or those affected by the tides. 4, certain lakes and ponds. 5, impoundments. And 6, wetlands that are adjacent to all of the above. The proposal also details what are not waters of the U.S. These include features that only contain water during or in response to rainfall, groundwater, which Congress never intended to be included under the definition, many ditches, including most roadside or farm ditches. A ditch that a farmer dug on his or her property would not be a water of the U.S. Prior converted cropland would also be excluded. Stormwater control features, and wastewater and waste treatment systems. I do want to address some misinformation that is already being reported. There are some reports that under our proposal, 60% of the nation's streams would lose federal protections, and one report said that 80% in California. That is not correct. The 60% number was used by the previous administration, and they did not have enough information to accurately or responsibly quantified changes in federally regulated waters. In addition, the maps that the previous administration used to support the 60% talking point do not distinguish between ephemeral or intermittent waters, which will be treated differently under our proposed rule. There is no nationwide map that identifies, quote, waters in the United States. As a result, this estimate should not be used to characterize the agency's current proposal. And in the case of California, the state already has regulations in place that are stricter than the federal government, so nothing will change for California's waters. But this shows you the point of our proposal, to clearly define the difference between a federal and a state water. I also want to be clear that our proposal would not impact other federal water protections, such as the Safe Drinking Water Act or our ongoing restoration efforts such as the Chesapeake Bay, Great Lakes, the Everglades, or the Gulf Coast. Right now, because of litigation, the 2015 rule is in effect in 22 states, while the previous regulations issued in the 1980s are in effect in the remaining 28 states. This regulatory patchwork creates uncertainty and impedes economic development. Our proposal would establish national consistency and provide greater certainty to states and landowners. Shortly after today's event, the proposal will be available online. The agencies will take comment on the proposal for 60 days after publication in the Federal Register and will hold a public listening session as well. Please take a close look at the proposal, not necessarily the news reports, but the proposal, and let us know what your thoughts are. Our goal is a more precise definition that gives the American people the freedom and certainty to do what they do best: build homes, grow crops, develop projects that improve the environment and the lives of their fellow citizens. Thank you for joining us today, and it is now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Please join me in welcoming R.D. James, the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works.
Good afternoon. I am R.D. James, Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works. My agency and the EPA and the Interior Department have worked tirelessly in trying to develop this new proposed rule. Hundreds of people worked on this, experts in hydrology, the law, past WOTUS bills, past court conclusions. And we've tried our best to come out with something that's fair, not only to this nation, but to the individuals who try to live and make a living in this nation. I'm pleased to be here today with Administrator Wheeler. We've worked hand in hand very hard with the EPA in developing this new definition of waters of the United States. In supporting EPA and WOTUS rulemaking, my objective was to bring a common sense approach to the definition, make implementation clear and predictable, reduce inconsistencies in implementation across the nation, recognize and respect the primary authority states and tribes have over their own water, and balance protecting federal waters with the need of supporting national economic interest. The proposed rule provides a straightforward definition of WOTUS that the public and regulators alike can understand, making implementation clear and predictable. The proposed rule focuses on those waters that are undoubtedly in the federal interest, recognizing and respecting the primary authority of states and tribes. This rule ensures a clear and understandable definition that respects state and tribal authority, balances local and national interest, and creates a more efficient process, thereby getting predictable decisions quicker to the public, allowing necessary economic growth to move forward. For my tenure as Assistant Secretary, my goal is to improve the overall efficiency and consistencies within our regulatory program. This proposed rule moves us toward that goal. I will continue to move this goal forward with such initiatives as improving how we support states and tribes that seek approval from EPA to assume the Section 404 program for themselves. In closing, this proposed rule helps address many critical issues that have been challenging for the public and regulators alike in determining waters of the United States. Thank you.
And now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce the Secretary of Interior, Ryan Zinke, who as a Navy SEAL knows more about water than I ever will.
And since I'm no longer in Congress, I'm going to uncharacteristically make my remarks very short. But this is a theme, is that a lot of decisions on wildlife, on water and land management are better at the state level. Clearly the overreach in the Trump administration's opinion is that there was overreach. And if you don't know the difference between the Potomac and the Yellowstone, maybe you're not in the best position to make decisions on the Yellowstone. And out west, especially out west, there's a lot of anger about federal overreach. And that anger in many cases is deserved. And decisions about our water, the decisions should be left at the local community and the state and the people that live there. Our Constitution never anticipated the federal government would be making decisions on intermittent streams and ponds and ditches. Those decisions belong to the people. And I want to thank the EPA and the whole team. I want to thank our members of Congress and my friends here for making a stand, because this is why we are all sent to Washington, to represent the people. And our government should work for the people and not the other way around. So just like sage grouse, it doesn't remove any protections. What it does, it puts the management decisions back where they should be. The people that work the land, that hunt, that own the land, and the communities that we all share our greatest bounty. So with that, thank you very much, and Merry Christmas.
Well, thank you for those opening remarks. At this time, I'd like to invite our distinguished members of Congress to come to the stage, and I'll call you in order. But I'd like to begin with Chairman Lisa Murkowski from Alaska. If you come to the stage, we appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, this is a good day. As far as I'm concerned, this is a good day. I want to thank all those who have been working so aggressively to address this rule. This is a big deal for the state of Alaska. In my time here on Capitol Hill, I don't know that there has been one single rule that has caused as much concern and as much frustration as the 2015 WOTUS rule, and that's saying something. We're a big state, as you all know. We're a big state, and we got a lot of standing water. We have a lot of what we call wetlands. We have about 174 million acres of wetlands. So to put it into perspective, and I see a couple cowboy hats out there, all of Texas is about 168 million acres. So we have more considered wetlands than the state of Texas. So think about what the application of that 2015 rule meant to us. The last rule left our businesses, our municipalities, and an awful lot of just individual Alaskans questioning about whether or not their projects were going to be compliant. And this was not just big developments. This could be as simple as, how am I going to put in a new driveway here? There was so much uncertainty that was created with the 2015 rule. And to make matters even worse, What you needed was you needed this army of hydrologists and engineers and lawyers just to figure out whether or not your project could even begin. So I'm very pleased that we are revisiting this rule. I'm glad the focus has been to clarify, to bring about some certainty, and I think most people would say to bring about some common sense with the regulations, but really trying to achieve this balance between the federal and the state relationship. And this has come about, as you have indicated, Mr. Secretary, by listening to the people, listening to the concerns of the states and those who've been living with these regulations. We can work together to protect water quality without casting a shadow over every construction project that's out there. So that's what has begun today, and I'm pleased to be able to be with so many of you who have helped bring this about. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chairwoman Mikowski. Next, I'd like to call to the stage Agriculture Chairman Pat Roberts from Kansas.
I got to tell you, talking to Zippy, I just came up here. I came here with security. I'm just a little nervous being in this building. Joni Ernst down here said, Pat, I think they're going to try to control your emissions. I don't know, 40 years of public service, 14 years as a staffer, all of you, some of you I've worked with for many, many years. First time I've been in the EPA. I am nervous. All you representatives from the Farm Bureau in 50 states, we have to exit quick, it's right out that door. So, the Secretary has made the speech. Thank you, sir, for your leadership. Thank everybody here for your leadership, more especially you, sir. Thank you. For too long now, EPA has been a four-letter word out in farm country. Now it is a four-letter word, the Environmental Farmer Protection Agency. And that's a good thing. Senator Stabenow from Michigan is the ranking member of the Senate Agriculture Committee, the least partisan committee in the Congress. And we went all over farm country the last 2 years talking about the Farm Bill. And every place we went, in all 50 states, we didn't get to all 50, but all regions, all crops were represented. And I figured the number one issue would be crop insurance. I figured that because I helped write it, so. And then maybe the trade situation, which we all know about, and all the tariffs and all that. Nope. Every time, about the second or third or fourth person would jump up that was representing a farm organization or just themselves individually and would say, what about WOTUS? It was all about having a irrigation ditch or a farm pond where no self-respecting duck would ever land under control to make it raise up to a certain level. I did talk to an EPA troop who came out to Kansas one time, and we were going around farm country, and he was a little nervous being in farm country, but at any rate, he said, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have all the farm ponds and have those farm ponds hit that quality number so that farmers could actually swim in the farm pond if they so wanted. I thought, what on earth is going on? Does he really think a farmer, after a hard day's work, is going to put on a Speedo and get in a kayak and try to go between the critters out there in the farm pond? Well, enough of that, because you're setting this straight with certainty and predictability. That's what we're trying to do in the Farm Bill, which will be, by the way, before the Rules Committee of the House, the Distinguished Rules Committee of the House, where we hope we get approval and we get the Farm Bill done as well. I want to say that I think I am speaking directly from farmers, ranchers, state agency officials, industries in Kansas, all across the country, who feared the negative impacts of the Obama administration WOTUS rule that would have been imposed upon them. I don't mean to single out the Obama administration. This has been a problem for a long time. I'm so pleased that President Trump and this administration, and Mr. Secretary, you especially, are following through on one of their first commitments to provide regulatory relief that was, and that will direct the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers to review and replace this. And that's happening today. I hope we do provide more certainty to farmers and ranchers about when the Clean Water Act regulations apply to them, and more importantly, what they do not. So on behalf of the farmers and ranchers and growers that I am privileged to represent, and all of us on the Senate Agriculture Committee, of which we have quite a few here, and the House, thank you. Thank you to the administration. Thanks to the EPA for your leadership, and thank you for taking this tremendous positive step forward in eliminating onerous and burdensome regulations while protecting our nation's water supply. I just can't think of a better day. I think I'm going to try to escape now. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chairman Roberts, and we've already let the security know to let you out of the building. Next, I'd like to call Senator Joni Ernst from Iowa to the stage for some remarks. Thank you, Senator.
Gosh, thanks everybody. It is great to be here today. This really is a tremendous day. I'll echo Senator Pat Roberts' sentiments that this has been impactful on our states. I'd like to acknowledge, of course, our Iowa Farm Bureau President, Craig Hill. Thank you for being here today. Craig and I had spent many hours out on the road doing our own meetings, and we heard consistently from our farmers and ranchers just how devastating this rule was in our rural areas. But not only that, as I was making my way around the state, I was hearing from even folks in the metro centers how detrimental this proposed rule was to those that were living in the cities and the metro areas. So it wasn't just our farmers and ranchers. It turned out all of our citizens seemed to be in peril from this ill-advised overreach of federal government. I do want to thank the EPA. This has been an important step forward, and especially under Acting Administrator Andrew Wheeler's leadership, for ensuring this WOTUS replacement rule was released quickly, very important, and properly to provide much needed regulatory certainty to the people of Iowa. I also want to thank the many stakeholders, many of you right here in this room, who worked so hard on this, from the Farm Bureau to the home builders to the individual farmers and ranchers who met with me over the years in DC and back home in Iowa. Taking the Obama administration's flawed WOTUS rule off of the books has been one of my top priorities. In 2015, I was proud to introduce the legislation that would have nullified the rule. With help from many of my congressional colleagues here today, we actually got this through Congress in a bipartisan manner, and we got it to President Obama's desk, where unfortunately it was vetoed. My first bill vetoed by the president. That setback didn't stop us from pushing forward, and here we are today, one step closer to finally ending this federal overreach. Again, I want to thank all the stakeholders that are here today and engaging in this discussion. Administrator, thank you very much. Secretary, thank you. Secretary, thank you as well. I appreciate everybody being here today and for supporting Americans, supporting our constituents and doing the right thing. So thank you all for being here. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Next, I'd like to call to the stage Senator John Hoeven from North Dakota. Thank you.
Well, I too really want to say thank you. Appreciate Administrator Wheeler, Secretary James, Secretary Zinke, and Secretary Senske, and the senators, the congressmen that are here, all the distinguished guests, the farmers and ranchers, all the organizations. This wouldn't have happened Zippy Duvall, without you and so many, like say, farmers and ranchers, many others across the country, saying, look, we need a common sense rule. And WOTUS is not a common sense rule. In our state, we're North Dakota, we're an incredible ag powerhouse. We're an energy powerhouse. And whether it's those industries or construction, or even just private property rights, right? Your land. I mean, who cares more about the land and the water on the land than the farmers and the ranchers and the individuals that own it? And we have to remember that. And we particularly have to remember that when we're talking about legislation, rules, or regulation from Washington, D.C. And we have to respect the rights of the states. This country was set up. Our Constitution sets aside those states' rights. And they have to be respected. By Constitution, they have to be respected. And so what we have here is a rule replacement, an effort to seek common sense. And as Secretary Zinke said, to make sure that government works for people rather than people working for government. Imagine if you're a farmer or a rancher or just a private property owner. After a hard rain, you go out and you've got a big puddle there that's not usually there. You should be able to do what you know makes sense as the owner of that property, right? Maybe in your family for generations. Who knows better the water on that property than the farmer who's had that land for generations? And what, his first call is supposed to be to the EPA to say, well, it rained last night, now what can I do on my farm or my ranch, or if it's a construction site, or if it's your land? So that's what we're talking about here. That's important at the individual level that we get this right. And that's what this is. This is an effort to get it right, to make sure we have clean water, clean air, all those things. But who's better stewards of the land than the people that live there, our farmers and ranchers? And so, I worked hard on the ag approach. We actually defunded the interpretive rule as it applies to ag in 2015 and 2016. Our federal district court in Fargo, North Dakota, Judge Erickson, put a stay on waters of the U.S. But we've got to get this sorted out and make sure that it works across the whole country. And so again, Administrator, and to all of the individuals here that lead the agencies and are working so hard to get it right, thank you. This goes out for comment now, and we'll see what all the comments are. It's an open, transparent process, but it is about common sense and getting it right for this great country. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Senator. Next, I'd like to call to the stage Senator Mike Rounds from South Dakota. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Look, I recognize that I am one of 20 speakers here today. And so in the interest of cutting this a little bit short, I'm going to submit my written comments for the record, if that's okay. I do just want to say thank you to Acting Administrator Wheeler, Assistant Secretary James, and everyone at the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers who have been involved in crafting this revised Waters of the U.S. or water rule. Look, this is a day in which we actually see some common sense, which is not real common in Washington, D.C. And what we've done is, as you've heard, we've actually tried to suggest that a rule would be appropriate here that is clear and precise and that allows the folks that we work for, the folks back home, to actually be able to understand what is subject to EPA and Corps of Engineer approval with regard to water activity. This is a common sense approach. Under some types of rules that I think are wrong, the ruling is such that if you have a question, you can always go to a bureaucrat and ask what they think and get permission from them in order to do something. In this particular case, what these organizations have proposed is a rule in which farmers, ranchers, citizens, builders, the public can look at and understand what is subject to EPA and Corps of Engineer regulatory activity and that which is not. And what that means is that for me, a county in South Dakota doesn't have to come and ask permission in order to spray weeds in a ditch. whereas under the old proposal by the previous administration, a 404 permit might very well be required just to go and do the common sense thing of being a good neighbor and keeping weeds out of your ditches. So today I think is a victory. It's a victory for the American public, and it says that we care about clean water, we care about our air, but we care about clean water, and we know that people across this country do as well. And that's what this is about, is sharing that responsibility with them at the state and local level as well. So thank you. I think this is a step in the right direction. We most certainly appreciate all the work that you've done. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Senator, and those will be the first official written comments in the open docket that we'll have. Next, I'd like to welcome to the stage Energy and Commerce Chairman Greg Walden from Oregon. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to thank the EPA Acting Administrator Andrew Wheeler and the team here on the stage for your leadership on this. You know, the last administration got it wrong. This administration's getting it right. I also want to recognize Sharon Waterman with the Oregon Farm Bureau, who is here in the audience. And I want to thank the Farm Bureau and the other ag groups who have been so helpful in bringing examples to light about what the old rule is doing out there. And we've heard of a lot of examples from our Senate colleagues. I want to tell you about in Oregon, district I represent, which is 2/3 the landmass of the state. I can brag about its size now that Lisa Murkowski has left the room. But in meetings throughout rural Oregon, farmers, ranchers, and property owners have expressed the same concerns you've heard from our colleagues in the Senate. And in Klamath County, for example, which was right on the on the California border, southern Oregon, Klamath County, there are ditches that provide both drainage and irrigation, many of which were dug in areas where water naturally flows at certain times of the year. Traditionally, activities like ditch cleaning or ditch drainage improvement did not fall under EPA's jurisdiction unless these were meaningfully connected to navigable waters. That's why this definition about what a federal navigable waterway is so important. However, under the Obama-era WOTUS rule, categorically included irrigation and drainage ditches. That left farmers having to acquire a federal permit just to continue farming, as in this case they'd done for 100 years. The Waters of the U.S. rule ignored congressional intent, it ignored local common sense and opposition, and it expanded the EPA's jurisdiction far beyond navigable waterways that the Clean Water Act seeks to protect. The Obama administration EPA unilaterally decided that their regulatory reach under this rule could encompass everything from stock ponds and irrigation ditches to vernal pools and even driveway puddles. The irresponsible power grab from Washington, D.C. had real impacts for hardworking families across the country and certainly in Oregon. So I think this modernized rule, this improved rule, shows that the Trump administration is listening and acting. This is common sense protection. And as you pointed out, Administrator, tribes and states will still have jurisdiction to deal with the rest of it. And this is where it belongs. So for our farm and ranch families, from our protecting our private property rights, congratulations on putting this rule out. Obviously, the public will have an opportunity to weigh in now, but this is a big step in the right direction. We deeply appreciate the administration's leadership on this, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. We appreciate that. Congressman Sam Graves from Missouri, would you please come to the stage? Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity. Most everything's been said. Not everybody's said it yet, which you're going to get to hear. But and I do want to thank Blake Hurst. He's with the Missouri Farm Bureau, president. We grew up together, literally right down the road, farming together. And Missouri Farm Bureau has been very active in this process. I'm one of the few members of Congress that's still engaged in production agriculture. I'm sixth generation on our farm. I farm with my father, my two brothers, my son, and my nephew. It's a corn and soybean operation. When we first saw the WOTUS rule come out, we were absolutely shocked at the blatant overreach that we were seeing into our personal lives, personal property rights. And this WOTUS was never about clean water. And as the administrator pointed out, this was always about the federal government getting more power and more control over our lives. The president recognized that. He listened to the people, and he made a promise. And I'm very grateful for that. The new definition of WOTUS is going to It's going to provide the flexibility and the certainty for us as farmers, as rural Americans, to manage our property for the benefit of both the economy and the environment. Now, I mentioned a second ago that I'm very thankful to the President for making a promise. Well, now I want to thank him for keeping that promise and for protecting our rural way of life. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you, Administrator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Next, I'd like to call to the stage Natural Resources Chairman Rob Bishop from Utah. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you for doing such a great job. I don't know if you can tell in the back there, but from my vantage point, I have to admit, Secretary Zinke, I think you've won the ugly sock contest up here. You had a pair behind you in competition, but that's... I'm
supporting science.
Just keep it right there. All right. In the very first session of Congress was supposed to come up with postal roads. And they were tired, they wanted to go home, they trusted George Washington, they said, let's just let him make those decisions. But one congressman from Virginia, John Page, stood up and basically shamed Congress into staying there and doing their jobs, and Congress created the postal road system. Now, in 1972, passed over a veto override, Congress came up with a piece of legislation that had lofty and wonderful goals, but they didn't stay there long enough to actually come up with the details of the law or the definitions of what the word meant. Instead, they allowed bureaucrats, later on, decades later, sometimes working with special interest groups to make interpretations that changed what their original intent was supposed to be and actually mitigated against those lofty goals they originally wanted to have. So I'm very proud that you here today have tried to put that back into some kind of concept that the rules should make sense, they should be helping people, they should be working with states, which after all, 96% of all programs and policies that deal with the environment are going to be done by and controlled by the states. You're working with them to come up with a system that actually helps farmers and helps contractors, helps the elderly who look at their land as their inheritance as well as their entire retirement policies. And instead of actually hurting people, which many of the regulations and interpretations had over the past, you're trying to come up with a set of rules that actually help people, not help politically motivated special interest groups. So I'm very proud of what you've done. I support it. Thank you. I still hate the Sox. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and boy, am I happy.
There's a theme. This is a Star Wars tie.
I'm going to go with the Secretary, but I'm just thankful I went with the conservative sock choice today. That's not always the case. Next, I'd like to call to the stage Congressman Garrett Graves from Louisiana.
I knew that Chairman Bishop had served in Congress for many years. I had no idea you would serve with George Washington. Learned lots of things about him. Hey, look, we know what these news stories are going to say. Half of them are going to say that we gave additional rights to farmers and private property rights, and half of them are going to say that we've trashed the environment. Look, let's talk about facts for just a minute. Number one, you have multiple injunctions. You read the law and you look at the regulations that were proposed under the Obama administration, it's irrecognizable. How these things could possibly be compatible, and the courts have found that. The Congress in both the House and Senate have stepped up and said that this is out of line. We simply asked the Obama administration to go back to the public, to engage property owners, farmers, small business owners, and others, and to get additional feedback to perfect this rule, and they refused to do it. I want to commend Secretary Zinke, Secretary Senske, Secretary James, and Administrator Wheeler for actually getting the public's comments on this, because we're a government that does represent the people. I represent the state of Louisiana, in fact, South Louisiana. That map is incredible. We drain about 2/3 of the United States. The Continental Divide, everything in between, including portions of Canada. New York, Montana, everything in between, and again, including portions of Canada. We care about clean water. But coming in and proposing rules like this that maybe under the Obama administration, maybe it would have worked for Arizona and New Mexico. It doesn't work for Louisiana. What's an ephemeral stream when you have a storm as we did 2 years ago that dropped 32 inches of water? An ephemeral stream is everything that is there in South Louisiana. It's everything. So look, this is common sense. It is compatible with the law. It is fixing the legal problems that the previous rule had, and it's the right thing to do for our farmers, for our property owners, and for our environment. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Congressman. And next, I'd like to call the Western Caucus Chairman, Paul Gosar from Arizona, to the stage.
What the pen taketh from the people can be given right back, as long as Acting Administrator Wheeler holds the reins at the EPA, that is. That's a takeaway from today, in my eyes. The regulatory edits here we're here to discuss will be maligned by the media as an attack on clean water, even though the United States had the cleanest waterways in the world during the decades prior to the Obama administration's WOTUS land and water grab. The people of this country, everyone ranging from myself to President Donald Trump to Roseanne Barr, Kathy Griffin, and even Raul Grijalva, wants crystal clean water. But virtually no one genuinely thinks it's a good idea for the federal government to monitor and control every last nook and cranny of the country in order to reach that goal. Our entire economy would transform to resolve around monitoring chemical levels and discharges and point sources if we were to have that kind of top-down system. Complete overkill. But that's not far off from what the Obama administration era definition waters of the United States would require. Not only is this a crazy idea, but it's widely considered to be, by legal experts, to be out of line with the Clean Water Act, not to mention the Commerce Clause of the Constitution. Like a villain in Scooby-Doo, the past administration almost got away with this unparalleled expansion of federal power. Fortunately, that legally dubious effort was unmasked for what it was by the Supreme Court and this administration. So I'm happy to be here today to see some sanity restored to the Clean Water Act implementation. Thank you to the secretaries, Administrator Wheeler, your deputies, and to President Trump for taking the lead and to crafting a definition that adheres to the original law, promotes extremely clean and safe waterways, and remains federalist in its nature. Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Congressman. Next, I'd like to call Congressman Bill Johnson from Ohio.
Well, I probably won't be as passionate nor as funny as some of my other colleagues, but I promise to be shorter. Hey, this is a big deal for the state of Ohio. Under the 2015 rule, you can't do coal mining operations. You can't do infrastructure projects. The interpretation of the 2015 rule is costing more. It's causing permits and the application process for those permits to go on and on and on forever. This is a big deal. And the common sense approach to collaborate with the states is the right thing to do. Nobody cares more about the air that we breathe and the water that we drink than those of us who live in those areas where we have these issues, and we're the ones that have to breathe it and drink it. Our state officials know how to do that well, and I just want to thank Administrator Wheeler, Assistant Secretary James, Secretary Zinke for all the work that they did in bringing us to this point. Let's get this across the finish line. I look forward to helping. God bless you all. This is the right thing to do. Thanks.
Thank you, Congressman. Next, I'd like to hear from Congressman Doug Lamothe from California.
Well, Secretaries, Administrator Wheeler, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'm a farmer in my real life as well, and so I'm especially attuned to what the challenge is, especially for my neighbors in Northern California. Obviously, this was put in place by the Obama administration in 2015, effectively expanding government control over all local land decisions and property rights. Our President Trump called WOTUS one of the worst examples of federal regulation. Indeed, the overreach is breathtaking. For me, for my neighbors, for so many. Litigation has caused this rule to effectively become law in over 24 states, including my home state of California. The new rule is a big win, and I thank you. It will provide certainty for countless farmers, ranchers, builders in my district, but all across the West and all across the country, who've struggled to understand and apply this onerous regulation. Senator Rounds used the word permission. Now, if you have to seek permission, that means someone is there that can decide to grant you that permission or not. And the process I've seen some of my local growers have to go through, waiting 3 years for a bureaucrat to decide if they're going to give someone permission or not, if they should choose to go through the permit process or just keep farming as they see fit, which is exempt under the regulations as under congressional intent anyway. One farmer in particular, John Duarte, agreed in August 2017. He didn't agree, he was forced to pay $1.1 million to the federal government for plowing over protected wetlands. Now, who has $1 million just to give the federal government because they mistakenly disked their land? I disked my land for years and years. In reality, he did plan later to do orchards, but he shouldn't need a permit for that. So, what we have is congressional intent. Indeed, is supposed to protect people for the use of their land. And now, I know with this bold move, and again, thank you all, there will be criticism. The usual sky is falling folks will be stepping up saying, oh my gosh, this is going to cause all massive amounts of pollution. Please hang in there. Please be firm for us. You know, I have representatives here from California, Jamie Johansson from Farm Bureau, Kevin Kester, and our cattlemen are here. So, you know, please hang in there. You've done a lot of good work on getting the word out on this, working with our administrators here and Congress. Let's win this. Let's keep it together. And I'm so pleased with this effort today. Thank you. Merry Christmas to you all.
Thank you, Congressman. And Congressman Bob Gibbs from Ohio, please join us on the stage.
Well, it appears I'm the last congressional person to talk to you, so you're relieved there. First, I want to thank and congratulate, really thank Administrator Wheeler and the secretaries for all the work they did, and the Corps, and all the work everybody else did. And it was so nice, so refreshing to be listening to all the speeches, especially from these gentlemen, because I heard common sense. And that's something we haven't had in Washington since I've been here in the last 8 years. So it's really refreshing to hear that. Also, every Farm Bureau state president is here, and the president of the American Farm Bureau, Zippy Duval, and I want to acknowledge my Ohio Farm Bureau president, Frank Burgett, is here. But that's how important, that illustrates how important it is to American agriculture when all the heads of the Farm Bureaus show up here. And they know this is one of their top issues, and they know the impact. You know, I think that when the Clean Water Act was passed, it was set up to be really a partnership between the feds and the states, where the states would implement it and enforce it kind of under the guidance of the feds. But the 2015 Obama rule took all that away from the states. It was a power grab to bring it to Washington, D.C., so we can have a one-size-fits-all policy. And, you know, it's been said here earlier today in all the speeches, one-size-fits-all policy doesn't work, especially when it comes to water, because there's different things going on out there. And so this gets it back to where it has to be in common sense. And I also like to say that I kind of have a litmus test, and maybe our people here that are head of the agencies that have to enforce all the regulations that are put out there, maybe they'll remember this litmus test that I think we should all go by, because I believe that American farmers, American business people, American people want to do the right thing. We want clean water. We don't want to, you know, I live in a farm, I'm a farmer, we want to make sure that that water is clean. We're first to drink it, so we all know that. The litmus test really is when some new regulation comes across your desk as farmers or business people, it'd be nice if you read it and say, you know, this makes sense. We probably should be doing this, versus why the heck do we have to do this? You know, and in recent years, there's been too much of this. This doesn't make any sense. And I would make a strong argument that when government, especially out of Washington, D.C., layers on more red tape, more bureaucracy, more duplicative regulations, at some point, farmers and business people that want to do the right thing are going to throw their hands up in the air and go, I just can't do all this. And they only do what they get by with. They'll go the extra mile. And so when we have common sense come out of Washington, D.C., we get government closer to the people at the state and local level, for them to work with our landowners and our municipalities and our cities and all the villages and all that. This makes a lot of sense, and this rule is in the right direction. We're going to have a 60-day comment period. Maybe we can even be improved. I don't know, but I think it's a good start, and to bring some common sense back and bring some certainty and transparency and puts it back to a local level where it should be. So congratulate you, and I want to thank you for all the hard work that's been done as we move forward on some common sense regulations coming out of Washington, D.C. to grow this economy. So I want to thank President Trump and his administration for doing what they said they were going to do, and we're getting it done. So thank you, and Merry Christmas.
Well, thank you, Congressman. And Congressman mentioned about common sense transfer decision-making to the states, and so that was a nice transition for us. We're transitioning to a state representative, the West Virginia Attorney General, Patrick Morrissey, will give us some remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here with so many people from the EPA and not be suing them. This is a great time. I want to start out by saying I think today is critically important because the Trump administration truly understands that to protect the environment and our interstate waterways, you don't have to destroy business, disrupt the economy, and violate the rule of law and the Constitution. Based upon what we've seen so far, looks like you guys got it just right. Now, the state of West Virginia and the 30-state coalition that's been involved in this litigation over the last 4 years, we appreciate the ability to be here. And West Virginia's played a central role helping to spearhead litigation against the 2015 rule. We stepped up and we filed a lawsuit against that Obama-era policy because we thought it had many legal defects. We thought clearly it violated the plain terms of the statute. It was inconsistent with the Administrative Procedures Act. And significantly, it really destroyed that cooperative federalism regime that we've come to rely on in the regulation of our natural resources, and certainly impaired the Constitution, dramatically overstating its authority over the Interstate Commerce Clause, and from a state perspective, violating the 10th Amendment. We looked at that 2015 rule, and we knew that we had to step up and take action, and we had that coalition that went into court that got the stay in many parts of the country. Thankfully, now we have an administration to work with that can actually put an end to all that regulatory excess. But one thing I saw traveling around West Virginia over the last year is that this rule not only violated the rule of law, it violated common sense. Everywhere I went, and I would talk to property owners and farmers, they would know that you can't regulate a backyard ditch the way you'd regulate the Potomac and the Mississippi and the Ohio. And that's why West Virginians are deeply appreciative of the Trump administration and the EPA for the actions that it's taking today. And we're going to take a pretty close look at this rule, but we believe based upon what's been described, this proposed rule is going to remedy many of those legal defects that we saw in the 2015 rule. And I can say to everyone here, the state of West Virginia stands ready, willing, and able to assist this administration to defend it against the inevitable lawsuits, unfounded lawsuits that will likely come our way from today. So I'd like to thank everyone for the ability to be here, and we look forward to working with you to help ensure that West Virginia and all the states properly retain their rights to regulate the way the Constitution envisioned. Appreciate it.
Thank you, General Morrissey. Next, I'd like to introduce a speaker from a department that I'm spending a lot of my time actually working to repair the relationship between the Department of Agriculture and EPA. Over the years, I think they've worked in conflict, and I'm proud to announce that we're working with Bill Northey and team to really try to repair that relationship that the agencies are working together, collaborating our resources to address the environmental challenges of our country. So thank you for being here. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce Deputy Secretary Stephen Zinke from the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Thank you, David, and what a great day this is for U.S. agriculture. Secretary Perdue and I, along with all of our nation's farmers and ranchers, really welcome this action from the EPA and the Army Corps. It brings clarity to the regulations to help farmers and landowners know where that federal jurisdiction begins and ends. USDA is very proud to stand here with our federal family partners in support of this proposed revisions to the WOTUS rule. Farmers and ranchers and landowners manage much of the land that is subject and potentially impacted by the Clean Water Act. And so getting that boundary right of where that federal jurisdiction begins and ends is very, very important, and is one of the most important reforms that this administration can make. Farmers and ranchers, as you know, are exceptional stewards of the environment, and they have the interest in taking care of their own land. And we also have, of course, effective standards in place from the states to make sure that our local waterways are protected. Among farmers and ranchers, and frankly, rural Americans in general, the WOTUS rule was singled out as the biggest example of federal overreach, where they thought that the federal government action just did not make sense. And so this action today really does make sense to America's farmers and ranchers, and we're very pleased to stand in support of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary. Next, I'd like to introduce someone who sat in the first chair on the stage thinking he'd go first, but we apologize about that. I'm just kidding. Zippy Duvall from the American Farm Bureau Federation, the President of the American Farm Bureau Federation, thank you for joining us. If you take the podium, we appreciate that.
Well, thank you, and we're very, very proud to be here today. And I want to say thank you to you and your staff for all the great work, and the President of the United States leading the charge. You know, I'm here to represent 6 million members of the American Farm Bureau and the state farm bureaus across this country, and I have the 50 state presidents with me, and I'd like for them to just stand up and let you see who represents the farmers and ranchers from around the country. Please stand if you're a state president of the Farm Bureau. About 5 years ago, when the WOTUS ruling was released, and we realized it was the largest federal land grab in the history of this country. And we knew that it was going to affect American farmers' ability to feed our people across the country and across the world. And we knew that we had to do something drastic to bring attention to the disaster that was facing us with this new rule. So we started a little campaign that called it Ditch the Rule. And this Ditch the Rule campaign caught on all across rural America. And we educated our people as to how intrusive it was to our private property rights, taking away the right for us to take care of our land the way we knew best. See, I'm 4th generation on my farm. My son is 5th, and my grandson will be the 6th. We fish in the waters around my farm. We farm our land like it's part of our family. We take care of our animals because the better we are to them, the better they are to us. We do all the right things to make sure that we can pass this piece of land on to our children and our grandchildren in better shape than what we received it. That's what our farmers and ranchers stand for and do each and every day. And they just want the right to do what's best for the land, because no one in the country, no one in Washington or in the Capitol knows how best to take care of that land than the men and women that live on it and till it and take care of it every day. So we thank you for giving us that right back to us. You know, I remember early on when I came here 3 years ago, I was asked, what does the new waters of the U.S. ruling look like? And I said, one, we need to be able to take that ruling, set it in our pickup trucks, and drive across our land and say, yes, that is the waters of the U.S. And no, I know that's not. Rather than have to go hire some lawyer or some consultant and pay them hundreds of thousands of dollars to come and tell us about our land that we know better than they do, will ever know. This gives us what we want. We wanted clear rules, clean water, and clear rules. And thank you, that's what we wanted, and we think that this ruling does that for us. It is just just a few years ago, I remember when the inauguration was going on, and I was honored to be asked to drive one of the tractors in the 1st Tractor Brigade in the inaugural parade of a President of the United States. And I had my iPad in the tractor waiting for my time to leave, and I was listening to the inauguration speech, and President Trump referenced giving this government back to the people. And then I saw Mr. Sonny Perdue come from Georgia, be Secretary of Agriculture, and one of his themes was, I want to tear down every barrier in front of the farmers and ranchers so they can do what they do best. And then I come here today, and I hear the administrator of EPA say that we want a clear ruling so that we can protect our waters and let our farmers and ranchers do what they do best. I think that the government is being given back to the people through this administration. Just a little story that sums it up. On that farm that I live on, and my granddad come back in the 20s, and he built a big round top barn. We see them all over this country. It's red and it's lined in white. And it is the centerpiece of my farm because it represents my heritage that I'm so proud of, just like these men and women that come with me today. And one day, we have lights shining up on it, so at night, it's the centerpiece, and everybody sees it when they ride down the road. And one night, my grandson was in my arms, and we was walking up the hill, and the lights were shining past us, and there was a big shadow of myself and him on that front of that barn. It covered the whole barn. And he calls me B-Pop, and he said, B-Pop, big man tonight. The old ruling put a big man in our backyard to watch over our shoulder and dictate everything that we could do with our land. Today, the big man's gone. I can go home and tell my grandson we're welcome to do what we're supposed to be doing best, and that's take care of our land and resources on it so that we can produce the food and fiber for this great country and this great people. Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Thank you, Mr. President, for giving us the Christmas present of a lifetime. And that's the right to do what we do best. Thank you. God bless you. Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Mr. Duvall, and I want to take a moment as we work to develop common sense policy across this country, both for this and other areas that we're working on. I want to thank you and your presidents, and more importantly, your members, for allowing my leadership team to go out into the countryside and be welcomed onto America's farms. Despite the title of my agency, we are working to restore the trust. We have some more work to do, but I want to thank you and your members for allowing us access to try to restore that trust, so thank you. So next, I'd like to introduce the CEO of the National Association of Home Builders, Jerry Howard, to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. On behalf of the 9 million people employed in the residential construction sector, I'm thrilled to be up here today. Uncertainty and overreach, that's what the theme is here. And when you have uncertainty and overreach, it makes it incredibly difficult to build American homes. Over the 8 years of the Obama administration, the regulatory cost of compliance reached 25% on average in America. 25% of the cost of every new home is compliance with regulations. That compliance is magnified, the cost of that compliance is magnified when there's uncertainty attached to it. When a builder can't look out on the property that he's bought to provide affordable homes for Americans and know that he can build, and he has to hire consultants and lawyers. Who pays the cost of that? The American homeowner. Right now, the cost of home ownership is at its lowest affordability rate in the last 10 years. The repeal of the 2015 rule is a good first step in restoring common sense and restoring America's commitment to affordable housing for all citizens. Secretary Zinke, Administrator Wheeler, President Trump, the home builders of America, and more importantly, the home buyers of America, thank you for putting common sense and certainty back into the law. Thank you very much. Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Next, I'd like to invite the President of the National Association of Manufacturers, Jay Timmons, to the podium.
Well, thank you very much. You know, this announcement is critical to the nearly 13 million men and women who work in the manufacturing sector. It's a step forward for manufacturers, for our country, and for responsible environmental stewardship. Throughout the Trump administration, manufacturers have been given significant tools that we need to enhance our competitiveness, and namely, those are tax reform and regulatory certainty. And with those tools, manufacturers have made a commitment to the people of this country to invest, to hire, and to raise wages and benefits. And today's announcement allows us to do even more. The kind of overreach that we saw with the 2015 WOTUS rule put manufacturing jobs at risk. It meant that companies large and small waste time, energy, and resources trying to navigate pointless jurisdictional fights. So at the National Association of Manufacturers, we spoke out. We made our case with the EPA and with the courts. Smart water policy is absolutely vital for all of us. After all, this earth is the only home that we have, and manufacturers intend to leave it better than we found it. Manufacturers simply ask for regulatory certainty. We promised that when we have that certainty, and we also have smart regulations, then we're going to be able to do our part to make our air and our water cleaner and our environment healthier. And we intend to keep that promise. So, Secretary Zinke, Administrator Wheeler, I do like the sound of that, and all of you here, thank you so much for your work on this important rule. Today, the EPA has done the right thing, and our environment and our economy will both be better for it. Thanks so much.
Well, we've heard from our federal partners. We've heard from our elected officials on the Hill. We've heard from our state colleagues. We've also heard from our regulated community. And I can make this commitment: we will continue to listen. As we develop common sense regulation for the American public, while we have a mission at the agency to protect human health and the environment, we also must balance that against our obligations to provide certainty, regulatory clarity, and understand that without a strong economy, we cannot pay for the laws and regulations that we have to implement. So thank you for everyone for your presentations today. We will continue to listen as we develop additional regulations in the future as we work to finalize this rule. With this, I think at this point I'm going to turn it over to John Conkus. I think we're going to take a few questions from the press. Is that right? Do I have this right? All right. John, why don't you come on over? You need the mic? Administrator, would you like to close it out? Or questions?
I'm happy to listen to questions from the press.
All right, thank you.
Maybe answer them. Do you want to join me for the questions, or it's your call? No? Well, we've certainly been working on the proposal for a year and a half now, I believe. President Trump directed us in the executive order last year to follow the Scalia decision, the Rapanos case, which is what we did. So we didn't make any specific changes to reflect Justice Kennedy's retirement, but some of it was written after he retired, obviously, but we did not take that into account.
Next question, Renee.
Oh, do I need this? Renee Marsh with CNN.
You have your own microphone.
I do. I have two, just to make sure you can hear me. Okay. So NOAA just put out a report saying that the Arctic is the warmest it's ever been. It's unlike anything on record. I wanted to know, have you seen that report? Do you have any concerns about the content of that report? And are you thinking about any policies to react to the findings in that report?
Are you referring to the assessment that came out a couple weeks ago?
No, this morning.
Oh, no, I've not seen that yet. I'm happy to take a look at it, and I'm sure I will, but I've not seen the NOAA report yet.
Okay, then just a follow-up question.
Have you seen it?
General question for both you, and if Secretary Zinke, you want to chime in as well. The American delegation, as you all know, are in Poland promoting fossil fuel. At that meeting, many protesters erupted in laughter. It appears that the world is laughing at the United States stance as it relates to climate change. What is your response?
Well, I don't think a planned protest can be considered the entire world laughing. I think those were the protesters, as you noted. But I'd also note that under President Trump's leadership, we've reduced our CO2 emissions from 2016 to 2017 by, I believe it's 2.7%. Overall, the United States has reduced the CO2 emissions 14.5% since 2005. We have our ACE proposal for the electric power sector, which after it's implemented will reduce CO2 emissions from the electric power sector by 30-some%. We can get you the exact number. It's 30-some percent. And the CAFE standard will also reduce CO2 emissions. We are moving forward, but we're not moving forward in a detrimental impact to our economy as what the Paris Climate Accord would have called for. And I'd also point out, and I pointed this out when I was at the G7 Environmental Ministers meeting in Halifax, that we are reducing our CO2 emissions faster than most other developed countries. So we have our own plan. We're moving forward. We're addressing the issue, but we're just not doing it to negatively impact our economy to the benefit of our competitors such as China or India or other countries that are not following the Paris Climate Accord. Thank you.
Well, I don't think OPEC's laughing. The United States stands as the world's largest oil and gas producer in the world. That was not possible a few years ago. First time in 6 years we're exporting liquid natural gas. Environmentally, it is better to produce energy in this country under reasonable regulation than watch it get produced overseas with none. If you don't believe me, I'll take you on a few tours of where I've been as a Navy SEAL. You want to look at environmental disasters of how to produce energy? I'll invite you to Africa and the Middle East. Secondly, manufacturing. Cost of steel is about the same in Pittsburgh as it is South Korea. Labor costs, we can't compete with China, nor do we want to. What makes America a manufacturing move is innovation, technology, and the cost of energy. And lastly, morally. I spent 23 years as a Navy SEAL. I don't know if you have grandchildren or kids, but I don't want your kids to see what I've seen. I'd rather not this country ever be held hostage by foreign nations on our energy needs. I don't want to ever see our kids have to deploy overseas and fight for a commodity we have here. The fact of the matter is we do it better than any other country. CO2 is down, methane's down, overall emissions is down in this country as compared to Europe, up, Russia, up, China, way up, India, way up. That's America. So I'm proud of the fact that we're the #1 oil and gas producer in this country. I'm proud of the fact that we're going to get even better because when America prospers, the world is safer.
WOTUS.
Hi, Zach Hale with S&P Global Market Intelligence. I was just wondering, there's been a lot of attention on how this revised definition treats wetlands, and I was just wondering if the agency has conducted any analysis to measure how much or how fewer wetlands would be covered under this definition compared to the previous definition.
Yes, first of all, wetlands that are adjacent to any of the other categories that are considered waters of the U.S. are protected. I listed the 6 categories. The 6th one was wetlands. Wetlands adjacent to all the previous 5 are protected. We are following, as I said, the Clean Water Act and the 3 Supreme Court decisions, including Swank, which talked about isolated wetlands not being included under the definition. We have not done, and nobody has in the history of the agency, a detailed mapping of all the wetlands in the country. Part of what we're trying to do is work with the states to develop a system to do that going forward. So we don't have the final numbers, which also means that the numbers have been thrown around over the last 24 hours. The 60%, the 80% are not accurate. We are looking at that, but we want to make sure that the wetlands that are adjacent to waters of the U.S. will be protected. And in addition to that, our restoration work, which includes wetlands around the Great Lakes, Chesapeake Bay, the Everglades, the Gulf Coast, those are all still be protected, and we're still working with those states and local governments to protect and restore those wetlands as well. Thank you.
Hi, David Schultz with Bloomberg Environment. I noticed that you had several members of Congress speak here today, but they were all from the Republican Party. I'm wondering if you worked with any Democrats on developing this proposal, given that they are now going to be taking back control of the House, and if so, what impact did you, or what input of theirs did you put into this proposal?
We certainly heard from a number of the Democratic members of the House and the Senate. I can't tell you off the top of my head what we changed in the proposal based on their comments and input. We've received a number of letters and hearings where I've testified in the last year, both my confirmation as well as the Senate EPW hearing. We heard from members of Congress, and we heard from a lot of members of Congress and senators on the Democratic side who wanted us to readdress the 2015 definition. And a number of them voted for the legislation that Senator Ernst mentioned that President Obama vetoed.
This will be the last question.
Thank you. Steve Davies with AgriPulse here in town. I was just wondering, you have a 60-day comment period that the previous WOTUS proposal, I believe, had a comment period of over 200 days. Would you consider lengthening that? And also, just as a quick follow-up, how many public hearings are you going to be having on this?
We haven't set a number yet on the public hearings that I'm aware of. I'm looking at my system administrator. Do we have a set number, or?
Yeah, we intend to do 1 public hearing and also 3 regional listening sessions and meetings with our stakeholders, states and tribes, in addition to webinars and lots of other relevant materials.
And on the comments, we asked for comments in the development of this proposal. We received over 6,000 comments that helped inform our decisions going into the development of this proposal. We are looking at just a 60-day comment period, but that's 60 days after it's published in the Federal Register. We're going to be putting it on our website shortly after this event, and it probably won't appear in the Federal Register for another 2, 3, maybe even 4 weeks with the holidays. But people will be able to read it sometime over the next 24 hours, and then we'll have a 60-day comment period. Thank you. And thank you all for attending. I want to thank, in particular, the Farm Bureau presidents who traveled here from across the country. Thank you so much for your attendance today. And please, everyone, please comment on the proposal. We want to hear what you have to say, both people here in the room and people watching this or reading about it later. We want to make sure that we get this right, and we want to hear from everyone on all sides of the issue so that we make sure that we are putting forward the best, most clear and concise definition so that all of you will be able to stand on your own property and be able to tell for yourself whether or not it's a federal jurisdictional waterway. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.